Hi, everybody. Hope you had a great lunch. So my talk is called A C2 Story, Outlook's One Setting Wonder. So instead of me just talking a lot before I get to the point, I'm going to start off by just showing it in a live demo, what I'm going to talk about. So I hope you find that interesting. So what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning the One Setting Wonder is this registry value here. It's quite interesting because when I set that on my machine now, I should be able to control it through my C2 framework. And what it does is that it changes the behavior of Outlook. So let's try and just import the registry key. I'm answering a yes pop-up. Importing it. Okie dokie. So I have my framework running here. There's nothing happening. But as soon as I start my Outlook client, it's kind of hard for you to see, but I'm starting Outlook here. It starts to connect to my framework. Oh. And that was all done with one registry value. So that is the premise of this talk. I hope that is interesting. That's how we kick off a call, right? A talk. OK, so this is a technique we have used at TrustedSec for the last 4 or 5 years already. And we have matured it over time. So I'm going to go over the story of this. Before I go ahead and do that, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Oddvar. I work as a Redteamer at a company called TrustedSec, based in the US. I have 25 years of experience within IT and IT security. I consider myself a hacker. I do speaking as much as I can, so I can get away from my office in the basement and actually meet people in real life. That's always fun. I do security research, and I do some blogging every now and then. If you have seen my name before, it might be due to the LOLBAS project. I was the one that started that project back in the day. Wow. Thanks. I appreciate that. But right now, we're a big team that helps flesh out new null bins and stuff like that. So it's not only me, it's a lot of other people as well. I also created the ultimate app blocker bypass list. It's not maintained anymore, but it's out there. So yeah, so if you heard my name, that's probably the reason why. We did release this framework I'm going to talk about back in July last year. So there's also a webinar that goes a little more into depth about this. So if you want to watch that after the talk, that's totally fine. The question we get asked a lot is, why have we decided to release this tool? If you have like a cool tool, why the heck do you want to release this to the public? And hacking LC doesn't approve. You got these eyes, the LC eyes, that's what we call them internally, the judgmental eyes. But yeah, the reason we decided to release this is that we have used this technique for many, many years, and there's already preventions and knowledge about this technique out there, but it doesn't seem to stop us. So we wanted to kind of release a tool and give talks about this to raise awareness, and we also wanted to give the community a new tool that spawned out of a Redteam technique, because I think that's pretty valuable to everybody to learn and pick stuff from. So before I dive into the actual story, I just want to give some shout-outs to Ethan Stallmans. He has been instrumental in terms of a lot of the research prior to us abusing this technique. So he has a lot of great information, especially the ruler technique. I will talk a little bit more about that a little later. And also Ben Wilson had a great blog post about the Outlook Today homepage persistence technique. Yeah, so I talked about ruler, and I'm not sure if anybody here knows this tool. Anybody heard of that tool before? OK, a few hands. So a couple of years back, when we had a lot of on-prem Exchange servers, this was the go-to tool for trying to get in. The tool is pretty cool because you could enumerate valid users if you pointed this to an Exchange server, and you could also password spray afterwards. So if you were lucky enough to find a valid set of credentials, you could get the tool to dump the global address list And then you could redo the entire spray and get access to even more credentials, and so on and so forth. But the main thing it was known for is, due to the name ruler, is you were able to, after guessing valid credentials, you were able to inject rules into the Outlook web client and get the rules synchronized down to the Outlook thick client on the desktops. And that is pretty cool. So Ethan also found out that you could set trigger words and stuff like that. So you could like say, run the rule if you get an email from me with the word execute or whatever. And it would run the rule and run the command from a remote server and stuff. So it was pretty cool. But the thing I want to focus my talk around is, or specific technique I want to talk about, is the VB script execution through the Outlook homepage, because that was what was interesting for us as a red team. So back in the day, when the homepage attack used to work, you had this, or when the ruler tool got released, you had this tab. So when you right-click any folder in Outlook and choose properties, you would have a tab called homepage. And the reason for having this homepage tab is so you could integrate SharePoint sites or intranet sites into the Outlook client. So users could easily access internal files and stuff directly from Outlook. I think that was the intent from Microsoft's side. But of course, we found out to abuse it. So this, of course, got fixed. But back in the day when this worked, you would normally just set this homepage through the ruler tool, through the web client, and it would get synchronized down, and then Outlook would start to connect externally to the server and fetch the homepage and run the code. So the way you would do it with the ruler tool, you would just run ruler, point to the credentials you had compromised, do the homepage and the ad, and then specify the URL. Pretty straightforward. And on the server side, you would host something like this. It's pretty straightforward HTML code, nothing special here. You can see the meta tags, the title tag, and you have a script tag. And the interesting part here is the sub, the window on load. So you can see the set application equals viewctl1, and viewctl1 is referenced in the bottom, where you see it references a COM object. So it's a COM object you can use inside Outlook, and this is how you get code to execute inside the Outlook. And then you use that specified application object to do the create object, to create a WScript shell, and then you can do WScript shell stuff, VBScript stuff. Just basic VBScript. In this example here, it starts Notepad. So nothing exciting, it's very basic VBScript functionality. Yeah, and this is code from Ethan's blog, by the way. So as I said, this got fixed. So Microsoft released a patch to basically kill off legacy features, such as the Outlook homepage. So this was back in 2017 that it got fixed. OK. So what happened after they installed the patch? Well, the homepage tab got removed. So on the left side, you can see how it was before the patch. On the right side, you can see how it was after. And of course, you know the answer to this. Was it really fixed? No, it was not. So my coworker, Sam, he found out in 2018, by looking at what the patch did, and by starting Outlook a million times using and looking at Procmon, he found that Outlook, when it starts, after applying this patch, it started to look for enable roaming folder homepages under the security key in registry. And he found out that if he set that to 1, the tab in Outlook would reappear in the properties pane. And the interesting part here is it lives in the current user. So that means you don't need admin access to actually apply this registry value, because all users can write to their own registry settings, right? So that was kind of cool. But digging further into this, he found that by adding WebView and then adding either inbox, calendar, outbox, or sent item, as a value, or sorry, as a key, he could then under there specify the value of URL and point it to an external server. And then it would actually pick that up and connect out, and it would work. So that was a really, really interesting discovery. This is how it would look in Pracman, looking for this. So you would typically start Outlook, and then you would see that it would look for WebView. Then you would create the WebView, then you would restart Outlook and look again, and you would see it looks for inbox, and then you would recreate that, and you would finally figure out that, OK, it looks for the URL. So yeah, that was cool research. And as I mentioned earlier, we released this back in July last year, the tool. And prior to releasing it, we started Googling, because we kind of want to get all the details in the story correct and so on and so forth. And to our big surprise, Microsoft already has this on their support portal. How to enable this again? So they have a patch to fix it, and they also have a workaround to get the homepage working again. OK, kind of interesting. So yeah, it's out there. And it's an old article, even. So for us, when we started to weaponize this back in 2018, what we did was that we created something we called a harness. It's just an empty HTML page. So we would typically call a user, and then we would ask them to run a registry file or run a script or something like that, and get them to execute code and add this WebView URL into their registry. And we would ask them to restart Outlook. The one thing that is different here from the original blog post, you see there's like a meta tag for refresh. It says refresh 300. The reason for that is because when you use the original proof of concept, when you went into the inbox, if you had the URL, it would connect once, run the code, and then you would need the user to switch to calendar or something else in Outlook and back to the inbox for it to run it again. So we figured out if we put the refresh tag in, it would actually refetch every 300 seconds, 200 seconds, or whatever we specified. So that was pretty cool. That was also something we found out during this journey. OK, so we stood this up on a web server. We hooked the client. And then when they started Outlook, we could see connections coming in. And oh yeah, I talked past my slides here. This is how it looked in the registry for the user. So we got them to set the registry value, as I said, and then we restarted Outlook. And on the client side, they would actually, if they were awake, they could see this blank field at the top of the inbox. That's the small HTML page that is actually rendering inside the inbox. Later, though, when we refined our toolkit, we found a way to hide that. So that's in the Specula framework. That is hidden. You don't see that anymore. This is how it was back in the day. Yeah, so that's how it looked. If they clicked View Source, they would actually see the code in a notepad. So when we wanted to execute something, we basically, on a web server, we saw that the agent was connecting, and then we knew we had 300 seconds to swap out the harness page with something that would execute code. And then we would just wait 300 seconds, and then it would execute, and then we would swap it back and review the result. So here's an example of us just doing like process listing. So we swapped out the harness code. This is just simple VB script code. You can see WMI service, connect to server, and all that stuff. And it enumerates all the things, and then it uses a defined post function we have to send it to base64 encoded to our web server. Super simple, but it worked. So for me, back in the day, I wanted to learn Python. And I felt like this really had all the components to be like a C2 framework. So for me, this was like a perfect opportunity to basically dive into Python and learn a little more about that in the process of making this C2 framework. Of course, my fear here was that somebody would detect that one registry value and build detections, and all my work would be wasted. But I decided I would make it anyways, because why not? It's fun. So I started developing this back in 2019, right after Black Hat. We had a team meeting, and I got inspired by the others, and I decided I would go for this. And I used Trevor C2. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. That's another C2 framework that our great leader at TrustedSec, Dave Kennedy, wrote. And I used that as a foundation for this project. And we decided on the name Specula as a project name. So the first alpha version was really simple. I had basic commands to list all the agents and stuff like that. The cool thing was that I already had like a way to hook multiple agents, because like previously, if you hook 2 agents, you couldn't differentiate between those 2. So you would just need to time like every callback and swap the correct payload to the correct machine and stuff. But using a framework like this, I was able to have a unique identifier for each agent. So that's speeded up the process a lot when working with this. Yeah, I used it on a couple engagements, and then I released our first version internally in December 2019. During that time, though, my biggest fear became a reality. It's so fun, because I literally just released like the first version internally, and Mandiant comes out with this blog post where they basically dissect the entire attack chain. They detected one of my coworkers using this technique, not using my framework, but using the technique standalone. So they found this, and they wrote a really good blog post about this. So they even posted a lot of code. It's kind of hard to watch, but this is just a mock for setting this up. So yeah, it got detected. Fortunately for me, this was just a manual technique. And it was he used a special blob storage instead of our normal web server, as we usually did back then. So it was a bit different. The cool thing for us, though, is that we got categorized as UNC 1194. So if you see that internally in your network, you know who it is. So yeah, but the blog post didn't stop us. We decided to continue. We pushed forward. So right off this moment, we have released 20 different versions internally. And I lost count on how many engagements we've used it on. And we still use it today. We have an internal version that's slightly different than the one that is public, but it's pretty much the same. In this process, we also discovered a lot of additional capabilities that I will discuss a little later. Let's dive into a little demo again. So we left off where the agent is calling back. And in this framework, we stood it up in such a way that you need to either set a value, so it auto-approves after a number of check-ins, or you manually approve it. So no actual cool, interesting code gets shipped down until you approve it. So I'm going to just approve the agent. What will happen then is that the Outlook client, if you look here, will eventually switch views to calendar, because I'm changing the URL in registry. So it picks it up after the user then clicks the inbox again. Now a new URL set, and this has its own kind of URL, so I know it's like a unique ID for that specific agent. And for the user, I mean, how often does the calendar switch? I mean, it happens. So right now, this is fully onboarded, and it's seamless to the user. And I can then interact with this agent. Let's just move it up a bit. I can set the refresh time so it works faster. And I can, let's see, we can do some basic enumeration. Let's see, Operation Outlook. Read calendar, for instance. This is a module. This will go into the calendar and just read out data from the calendar. You can see the log at the bottom. That's just to show that there's activity. So if I write data now, you can see the output from that module. You see getting calendar items from. So today he's going on a pirate ship, and tomorrow he's going to recover from a pirate ship. So that's fun. Yeah, there's a lot of different modules here. I don't have time to show them all. And internally, we have even more modules. But yeah, let's do... Yeah, we can do Explorer. That's interesting. So I have a separate Explorer function where you can list files. And you can see the into directories and stuff like that. All over Outlook. Right. Unfortunately, I don't have time to show all the modules, but I still got some cool slides, and I got some cool functionality in the end I want to show. So I'll skip ahead. So one of the limitations, as you can imagine, is that we are using VBScript. And if any of you guys have worked with VBScript, you know it's pretty limited on what you can do. There's no direct access to the Windows API and stuff like that. So you need to be creative when you're creating your modules. You have to kind of think out of the box in order to create something that will work. Another issue we had when we were developing this was if we created VBScripts that ran for a long time, it would actually make a pop-up in the Outlook client saying that a script is running that is taking too long. Do you want to continue, yes or no? So we didn't want that. So that was a thing we had to overcome. We also wanted this framework to be modular and be able to easily be extended for other operators. So we made it very modular. And we also had, instead of hard-coding things into the framework, we have a config file where you can specify DNS names and URLs and all that stuff. So it's customizable as much as possible. Here's an example of getting creative. This is something I just released, actually. This is in VBScript, you don't have a way to look up domain names or DNS records. There's no NS lookup in VBScript, strangely enough. So in order to get creative here, I used WMI to do a ping towards an address, and only one ping packet. And then I would look at the result of the ping packet and then pull out the protocol address and return that. So that's a way to do NS lookup with VBScript. That's just an example of how you need to be creative in order to build the functionality you want. Yeah, so we did a lot of discoveries during the development. One of them was, as I said in the demo, we have this time-delayed approval process. You can set, like, you need to check in 10 times before you are approved. This was a great way to kind of keep the blue teamers away from our framework, because normally they would do like 1 or 2 calls to our server, and then they would stop, and they would look at results. So that way we could have like an auto approval after 10 attempts, and it would be more sneaky that way, or switch to manual. And also the part where we switched to the calendar view, that was actually quite obvious when you think about it, but it wasn't obvious when we discovered it, because normally what we did was we set the registry key to the URL. We would start Outlook, and it would pick up the URL. And when you change the URL, in our head, we probably thought that we needed to stop Outlook and start it again for it to pick up the new URL. By accident, we discovered that if you just switch views, it will pick up a new URL. But if you set it initially, that won't work. It's only for changing the URL afterwards, because then Outlook knows there's a web URL. Another thing was to kind of overcome the issue with long-running tasks, we made it in such a way that we chunked it up. So for instance, if you want to download a file, the script logic will split the file up in chunks. So it doesn't it's not big enough to trigger like the delay for the scripting engine in Windows. So we did a lot of tweaks in order to get that to work properly. And we also found, and this is the most exciting part, we found that we could get API access using VBScript by creating our own custom COM objects. And I'm going to dive into that a little more. Because at that point, I mean, it's limitless what you can do if you can access the Windows API. So I mentioned we had a modular design. So when you want to create a new module, and this is all documented on our wiki page and all that stuff. But you create a single PI file that explains how the module works, and then you have a matching VBS file that is the actual code that runs on the agent when you send it down. And the design is in such a way that if you add something new to the folder structure, the tool will automatically pick that up, so you can easily extend along while doing operations. So if you want to create like quickly a VB script that does something new, it's super easy to add that along the way. We also added, we spent a lot of time on, I should say Chris spent a lot of time on creating a way to handle different values. So like sending integers, sending quotation marks and all that stuff to VBScript can be complicated. If you ever worked with VBScript, you know what I'm talking about. So we spend a lot of time getting Python to handle values correctly and inject them into the VBScript correctly. So that's automated, kind of automated in the framework. We also defined helper functions. That way we could, instead of sending like a big script of code down to the agent, we chunked it up. So if you need like a helper function for reading the registry to do your work, it will pull down the helper function for reading the registry and your code alongside that, and then you can execute the code. So it doesn't send all the code at once. And we also added hooks to handle return data. So let's say you do like a list directory, and you want to do something with the data coming back. You can define that in the Python module, in the Python part of the module, and say that you want to, I don't know, run a separate script after that, or queue up a new task if you see that, or something like that. And this is how it's organized. So you can see there's, if you go to the Specula framework, you will see there's a folder called functions, and inside functions, that is where all the code lives. And we have categorized them into folders. So we have a folder called API here, one is called enumerate, and it has a subfolder called host. And under there, there's a bunch of modules. So you can see what I'm talking about. There's like a Py file and a text file, and the text file is the VBScript file. So here's an example of a Py file. It looks like a lot of code, but it's really not. The only thing you change is normally the help and the self entry, and that needs to correspond with the VBScript file that you will call later on. The name has to match. And here you can also add helpers, and you can add options and all that stuff. It's pretty easy to find out if you read the documentation we published. And this is just an example of a function to list the clipboard. It's actually quite interesting in itself. You can use, you can create an HTML object and do parent window, clipboard data, get data text, and you will get the clipboard, and then you can send it back through VBScript. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, so also interesting thing here is when you're doing VBScript, you see the function name is list clipboard. When you return data to the server, you need to specify what you want to return in the end. So you see list clipboard at the end equals clipboard data retrieved, line break, and then the text you got out from the function. That is what the server will receive in the end, what you set the function to in the end. I also talked about the API access. As I said, VBScript itself doesn't have API access, but Visual Basic Script can make registry changes, it can write files, and it can interact with COM objects. And all those three things together means that you can plant a file, you can register a COM object, and you can leverage a COM object, meaning that you can get API access. And for us, when we discovered this was like mind-blowing. Like, why didn't we think of this before? It's obvious. So in our release, this COM object that we included is just meant as a template for you all, so you can extend the way you want. We have some pretty cool stuff internally that I can't currently release. Hopefully, at some point, we will. But the things that are in the repo now, I think it's run shell command. It's just showing an example of how to run shell command through the API. And there's also a load DLL function to just load a DLL. Nothing super exciting. It just shows how to do it so that you can extend the way you want to do it. For instance, internally we have, like you can do long-running tasks as well. Like internally we have a function to do keylogging. So you can fire up, you can have a COM object planted, and you can call a function in that COM object to start a keylogger. And then you can wait a day, and then you can call another function to retrieve the keystrokes from that function, or from that COM object. Then you get the keystrokes. This is how a typical function would look like when you define it as a COM object. You can see here, this is just load library. It's just a way to call load DLL. It's super simple example. Let's try and demo that. So if I go back here, let me try and go here. So we have a lot of modules, as I said. So in order to use, well, let me show this first. If I do agents, you can see on the right side, it says API installed, false, verified, false. In order for us to use any of the API functions in the framework, we need to install the API. And in order to install the API, we need to know the architecture of Outlook, because there's a difference in terms of planting a COM object if it's 32-bit or 64-bit. So in order to figure that out, there's a dedicated module for finding out the architecture. So if I go into, oh, that's the wrong one. Office Arch? Yeah. So this is a module to basically just pull out the Office architecture. And you can see here the result is 64-bit. And this is stored in the database as under Office Arch on this agent. So that way, when I do install API, this is a function that will upload the file, register the necessary registry keys and values, and then it will run a VB script to verify that it can actually call it afterwards, to verify that it actually worked. And this is depending on the Outlook architecture. So it takes the correct DLL file. So if we just run this, it queues up a lot of tasks. So let me just set the refresh time to 1, so it goes a little faster. You can see I'm now uploading a file, chunk by chunk. So it takes a couple of check-ins for it to actually complete the entire installation, because that's how you transfer a file. And on a red team, you normally have time for this, but of course, when you're on stage in front of an audience, you kind of, yeah, you hope it could go even faster. But that's how it is. So a few more callbacks. And again, nothing is happening in Outlook. Nothing's happening. Where is it? No, nothing's happening here. The user will never see anything, so I think that's cool. OK, it's done. And now it's doing its verification. It says verify true. So if I now go back to agents, I can see that the API is installed and it's verified. So I'm now free to use all the API functions. So we have, as I said, load DLL and run shell. So really not that interesting. But let's see if we can trigger run shell, for instance. Set CMD. I think there's like a process explorer somewhere. I think it's here. Let's see. Oh, it popped up here. There we go. So that actually executed code from my server into the VB script. The VB script called a COM object that connected to the Windows API and ran and started the binary. I think that's pretty cool. Right. In terms of mitigations, as you probably already know, VB script is going away. So as of Windows 11 24H3, this is now an optional feature you can turn off. By 2027, this will be default removed. That's what Microsoft says, unless they've changed their opinion. Another thing that breaks this attack is if you switch to the new Outlook version. There's like this tab on top of Outlook where you can like switch switch it to on, and it will basically change it to a completely different version of Outlook. So this attack won't work on the new version. Another preventive measure you can do is to do some custom scripting and just block write access to everything under WebView. That's something you could do, in theory. The most or best recommended way of handling this is to do those two GPO settings you see here. Do not allow homepage URL to be set in folder properties policy setting. This should effectively disable this attack. And also, I would also encourage you in the same GPO, set the Outlook Today availability to disabled, because there's also a thing you can abuse there in terms of setting a homepage. If you are using Microsoft baselines, which you should do to harden your environment, this is already fixed. This attack won't work in a hardened environment by Microsoft. Detection-wise, I would strongly encourage you to detect on anything under WebView, unless you use it internally. I guess there's like 1% of customers that uses this legitimate. I think I've seen it once. So I would just make a detection that looks for anything WebView or today under the Outlook registry key and detect on that. If you want to access this tool, you know, when you create a tool, you need to have a cool name and all that stuff. I had to buy a domain as well. So it became specula.rocks. I felt that was pretty cool. And also, we needed to have like a cool logo and stuff. So if you want to access it, it's up there. You can git clone it. And there's a great README on how to install it. We also have a Wikipedia that goes over like how to use it. Not only that, we also have actually a playlist on the TrustedSec YouTube channel, where we spent a lot of time just going over the basics, how to install it, how to update settings after installing it, how to get agents hooked, and all that stuff. Also, if you want to join the community, so to speak, we have a Discord channel on the TrustedSec Discord. We have a dedicated channel called Specula, where you can ask questions or suggest improvements or stuff like that. Me and Chris will be there and be on the lookout for any messages there. And as I said, we have this Wikipedia. We spent a lot of time fleshing that out, so it will be helpful to everybody. And we also wrote a blog when we'll release the tool that goes into a little more details. And as I said, the tool can be found on Specula Rocks. Any questions? No. Thanks.